Call the meeting to order. Workshop to order. So, Raquel, you're up.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm Nicole Elko, the city's coastal management consultant, and I'm here to introduce you to Folly 2050. So many of you have been working with us over the last year on this document. Did the full report get distributed into the packets? Okay, great. So it is a 20-page report. We worked hard to make it not 150 pages. There are a lot of appendices, but the report's in your packet, and then what you have in front of you are kind of a front and back little flashy flyer, as well as the implementation table, and we'll talk just a little bit about each of those. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the people that helped make this possible. So this is the update of our sea level rise adaptation plan. And we worked with South Carolina Sea Grant and the College of Charleston's Low Country Hazards Center. We had an amazing graduate student helping us who's here with us tonight, Cheyenne Cunningham. And of course, city staff, Jenna, Eric, and Aaron, and Wes really helped to just coordinate this and bring together over 150 stakeholders, whether that was through online engagement or in-person meetings, interviews, to really see where we think we are with implementation of sea level rise adaptation in the city since the 2017 report was published. And overall, we're doing great. We have identified a couple of areas where less progress was made, but as you know, the drainage projects, the codes and zoning that have been put in place, we're doing a lot here. And I think sometimes we lose sight of exactly how much is getting done. So that was kind of the point of this Folly 2050 Planning for Water handout that you have on the hard copies. Is there's a featured projects page that just reminds people like, hey, we're getting a lot done to adapt to sea level rise. Also in this little flyer you have in front of you, and I guess I should also say in my introduction is that we are kind of throwing all this information at you tonight so that we can ideally adopt this at the next council meeting. So this is sort of, what we could put to hand out to the public to let them know just a little bit about why we decided to plan for 1 foot of increased water level by 2050 and some QR codes that will take them to the flood mapper where you can kind of zoom in on your property and play with different sea level rise and water level scenarios. The plan itself is broken down into 6 categories, which are laid out on this matrix that you have in front of you. They are very similar to what we did in 2017. The only differences is that we pulled out building codes and zoning, transportation, and septic as their own categories out of just like land management or water management, because they were really brought to the forefront during our interviews in our engagement activities. So ideally, because this is an update to the plan, it's not a brand new plan, we're already making a lot of progress. So what we hope is that upon adoption, we can get right to work on a lot of these initiatives you see before you. So for each of them, as you read across, the very first one should be kind of like the low-hanging fruit, right? Now, launch a professional awareness campaign. Those of you that attended the charrette know that was a big thing. Like, hey, we're not doing as well in education as we are. We're implementing lots of drainage improvement projects, but does anyone know we're doing them? And do they know why we're doing them, right? So that education component was an easy one. Under land management, restore and conserve flood-prone land. We're doing a lot on that already with some land acquisition that's going on. But what more can we do? There's a lot of grant money out there, right? You could potentially go after some grants to implement that. So just a couple of things that we think can be done quickly. Also using public art on the purple box on the right to communicate flood risk. We have an opportunity to partner with the South Carolina Aquarium and to put up these signs around town, around the city at kind of flood prone areas where folks can take a picture, and there's a scale, right? So they can actually see, oh, the water's at, what's at a foot of flooding, and they can snap a picture and it will upload to a data service. Lots of cool ways that we have in mind to engage the community. If you want to dive into the details of the report, And, you know, I can go over a few others. There's some, under building codes and zoning, the first one is to clarify the code to define and expand pervious surfaces. So impervious surfaces are defined well, but we want to clarify that. Consider perhaps including walkways, pool decks to the driveways, definition that's in there now. So that's a little bit more on that one. And I could go into detail on all of these, but I don't really think we want to get into all that detail tonight. But I wanted to get this in front of you and see if you have any questions for us or edits to the materials you see before you.
I saw where on the bridge, it's a no wake zone under the bridge, and some of the residual waves are causing the erosion of the bank on both sides near the Folly River Park. And I guess that was on page 5 of our handout. It says, although boats must slow down for the no wake zone under the Folly Bridge while passing the boat ramp, a residual wake may still stress the marsh edge. I was wondering, are there any markings on our bridge or any buoys that indicate no wake zone?
Yep, so great question. We went into this quite a bit with the first sea level rise adaptation plan and specifically with the marsh management plan. And the short answer is no. But that's not no fault of our own. It is a DNR responsibility, as I recall. So we need to get with them in terms of marking slow speed zones and establishing new ones if that is of interest.
Is that something we could follow up on at a staff level? I know in other places I've been, they've had like placards on the side of bridges that say slow down, no wake zone.
Yeah, and you know, it is a state law that within more than 500 feet of a bridge to go slow, but most voters today aren't very well educated on things
Like
like
a little
that.
bit of signage might go over.
Within so many feet of a boat, man. You only get with DNR.
That was the issue last time, a couple of years ago, for Bears Cay, Marine, and all that kind of stuff. And the reason why they didn't mark all that is because they said should be common voter knowledge that within so many feet of any boat landing or bridge, it's every bridge, not just our bridge. It's no way, but
We'll chat with them
that
again.
was the explanation. I could try again, but that was the
Sometimes-
explanation I got.
Sometimes common knowledge is not so common.
Comments in particular.
It's especially not common when you don't have to take a course and pass the test.
That's right. And I understand that the reluctance to put navigational hazards out there, you know, people run into or catch with their anchors and whatnot, but certainly a placard on the bridge would not pose any danger to boaters or pedestrians or vehicular traffic. So just a thought.
I'm sure if we talked, we provided them, they would have no problem. It's just they weren't interested in doing it themselves last time.
Let me know if you need something from council.
Anything else? I'd just like to say thank you for all the hard work, you and your partner. So Kim, you're up. You and Jenna.
Hey everybody, Kim Morgan, hello. I work for Weston and Sampson as a resilient urban designer and senior project manager, and I'm also a resident of the city of Folly Beach, and thank y'all for all y'all do to make this such a wonderful place to live. Jenna and I have been in conversations, and it's perfect following on the heels of Nicole's work of the potential to do a demonstration living shoreline at the Folly River Park. As I think everybody's well aware, in 2021, the first time ever a permitting process was established through the General Assembly for living shorelines. That what came out of the heels of 5 years of dedicated research from the Department of Natural Resources, as well as proof of concept from the Nature Conservancy, Fish and Wildlife, other agencies that have been building these practices in the state of South Carolina for 10 to 20 years. Prior to this process, if you were a coastal resident, your options for stabilizing your shoreline were revetment, seawalls, riprap, that type of thing. And now living shorelines can really work in conjunction. So they're not necessarily intended to replace that gray infrastructure, although in some cases that might be an opportunity. But they're more, so if you lived along the Folly River, you had a seawall, but you have salt marsh in between you and the river, but you have that boat wake that's, eroding your marsh edge. That's a great place for a living shoreline. And of course, the reason we like the living shorelines is because they can protect our existing salt marsh. They also have been shown that they can elevate with rising sea levels, so they can make our coast more resilient as oysters grow on top of each other and sediment accumulates behind the living shoreline. We know that they filter, water, they're great water quality, hard workers, habitat, on and on, carbon sequestration, et cetera. So South Carolina is in a great place now that we have this permitting process, and we have the research to show we know how to build living shorelines in South Carolina, and make them successful. So myself and Lucas Hernandez met Jenna sometime over the summer and did sort of a preliminary site assessment at the Folly River Park. And I think y'all all got the memo that I sent to Jenna. It's got sort of the results of that preliminary site assessment, looking at slope, looking at sinkability, looking at fetch and how much wave energy is coming in there, and really trying to see what living shoreline practice would be successful at the Folly River Park. And we came up with sort of a concept plan. So you'll see the results are in the memo of what we found when we went out there. But the proposed, scope of work, the proposed concept of the project, which could be scaled up, it could be scaled down. It's just, a starting conversation point, would be to do additional site assessment, to create concept plans, which could be used for communication with the community. Any living shoreline permitted in South Carolina requires engineered drawings. So we would create those engineered drawings and execute the permitting process with SCDHEC, OCRM. My recommendation would be if that happens, that we would want, city staff to be involved so that then y'all know the process, because truthfully, not that many people have gone through the process yet. It's such a new emerging practice, and with how DHEC OCRM is handling it. We would do an installation with 4 different methods. The 4 primary methods in South Carolina are the oyster castles, the manufactured wire reefs, the bag shell, and the core logs. And when we did the installation to create the demonstration site, we would do it as part of a community event. So we would have that, open to the public, open to your residents to come out and be part of that, as well as, an education opportunity ahead of time. And then the end product, which is something that I think I'm personally would be really excited about, is like a resident kind of guidebook that kind of, in a concise way talked about site assessment, talks about, matching that site assessment with the methodology, or, those methods that I mentioned, provided a sample to engineer drawings, because even the engineering community is right now still figuring out, what do these drawings look like? What is DHEC looking for? That would all be provided in there. So it's really an opportunity to go through that permitting process. And Folly's been very fortunate to have folks like DNR doing a lot of oyster restoration along the shorelines, and I've spoken with them about this potential project, and they don't have to go through any of this. So if you had a resident that wanted to do a living shoreline, totally different experience than what DNR is going to do, because they're covered under a general permit. So this is really just an opportunity to see what it would be like to be a resident who wants to do this. That's it.
That's it. Any questions?
Yeah, one. So I'm extremely receptive to this idea. I think the more tools we have as a community, better. We've been talking about living shorelines for 5 or 6 years, if not longer. To piggyback on what Mr. Farley had said earlier, and I'm hopeful that we will get that signage at the bridge, potentially elsewhere, to curtail fast-moving boats, wherever we can. I suspect there's not the will to do it all up and down the river, particularly in more narrow points where we have more susceptible environments. But one thing I observed over years of living on the river that I perceive to be most problematic, it's not straight line, fast moving boats. It's the one pulling water skiers. It's the one that are outfitted for wakeboarding. They create wakes half as big as what's on the ocean today. And it's, I feel as though the marsh was never, designed naturally to survive that sort of impact, if you will. So again, I don't know if anything can be done about that, but food for thought for this council. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing, that I've observed is whenever you see that boat weight coming in, particularly if it's at low tide and you have, an oyster reef there, you have a living shoreline there, that's gonna, really help defend the marsh. And you can see in the memo, you can see the erosional scarp. There's probably about, 12 to 18 inches in some spots where the marsh is sloughing off. And the thing I'd be excited about the Folly River Park is it would be a really incredible vantage point for people to see it from a demonstration, because you'd actually be looking back at the living shoreline, whereas anywhere else in the state you're looking, from the land over it, and it's kind of harder to experience that if a wake's coming in. You can really see it at work.
How about those who are harvesting oysters lawfully? We limit these areas so that they cannot trample them to get at.
So we've actually
Right.
talked about that a lot, and we kind of came to the conclusion that was like the sign of a really successful living shoreline. If it got to the point that we actually had people coming to harvest oysters there, that, it would have to probably, be really successful and grow a lot of oysters. But I know DNR, or maybe it's Fish and Wildlife, has done some signage before that's just like, this is a restoration site, and kind of take that into consideration.
Yeah, they'll mark places you're not supposed to harvest oysters and clams.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, you're up.
There. Clemson Extension runs a Master Rain Gardener program, and they have generously chosen Folly Beach to install a rain garden in front of the community center last year. And for the second year, they've chosen the Folly River Park now for a second location. And just a refresher, a rain garden is a system that diverts water from the roof of a building to a depression that holds the water with native plants, water-loving plants, and it helps with localized flooding, it helps with erosion. And so this year, the extension is offering this new rain garden. They will provide the design, which is part of the Master Rain Gardener program. The students, 30 or 40 students, will come out here and design a rain garden. They will provide the plants, the installation, and a sign. And the sign is important because it offers a demonstration for Folly Beach residents to see this as an opportunity for something that you can do in your own yard that helps with localized flooding.
Where?
Folly, beside the gazebo.
On which side?
If you're looking at the gazebo, the marsh to the right, between the gazebo and the dock, back.
I know where the dunk tank was.
What's that?
I know where the dunk tank
You said no, we're duct tape. You're
was. I
out
know,
of
that's
here.
why- but he knows where that was.
Well, I know what she's complaining, but I just wanted her to tell everybody where it was.
Yeah, between the gazebo and the dock.
So I'm assuming that it has to be around the gazebo so that, okay,
It's taking the water from the gazebo and taking it into a cistern that then
and
drips out into the,
got it.
Garden.
So then why not to the left instead of the right? Looking at it. Why
Look at
not
that
to the,
big pine tree sitting there, probably.
I'm trying to, is the pine tree, is
you
something?
know,
Yeah.
this is, we met with Clemson Extension and this is their,
The side they're talking about is pretty open.
Yeah, and it gets more sun for whatever plants.
Yeah, sounds good.
Any concern about losing that area of footprint for park uses?
I don't think so. I think it's gonna be back enough to the marsh that it's, and we're talking 10 by 20 feet.
Well, that, Mr. Fowler, that was sort of where I was headed to try to see. That is a fairly open space, and that's why I just was curious, since I have it memorized from Halloween times and things like that. So I just was curious, did they look to the left is a question. I mean, I'm not putting you on the spot per se,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I came out with Jenna and helped Clemson too with the sighting, and I think it had something to do. You can actually, I went out there during our storm, and you can actually see that's where a lot of the water wants to go.
anyway, naturally to the right, it wants to go that way.
Yeah, and there's a pretty good erosional spot that's happening on the drip line off of the roof right there too.
Thank you.
We're trying, not to fight with the water.
Yep,
Let it
go
do
with
what
the
it's
flow.
Doing.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you. Mr. Pope,
So next up is a change in our interpretation of transfer of ownership as it relates to STRs and business licenses. When the ordinance passed back in February, there's some gray area presented by the language as adopted. We know that licenses transfer on ownership of the property, but at the time, there was a question whether or not the transfer of a legal entity that held a property counted as a transfer of the property itself. So since February, we have gone under the assumption that the same legal entity owned the property after it was transferred, so the property wasn't transferred, just the legal entity. We now believe that we have the means to more fully capture what's going on here and enforce the ordinance and say that we will count the transfer of a legal entity that owns a property as a transfer of the property. And I know that's a lot of words, so I prepared a little summary. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong here. So this policy only affects licenses that were held by LLCs, trusts, or legal entities that are not human individuals prior to the vote. If this is post-vote, post-February 7th, anyone who attempted to transfer a property from their individual ownership to an LLC or a trust, that would trigger loss of the license. That's clearly transferring the ownership of the property. So this policy only affects licenses that were held by legal entities that held the property prior to February 7th. We don't know how many there are, but Stacy's going to find out.
So just for clarification, if an individual owns the property before the vote, they can transfer the license when the property transfers?
No, they would have had to have done it before the vote. They would have transferred it out of their name into an LLC or trust before the vote.
Would an individual who held it that way prior to the vote, afterwards transferred it to an LLC, have known that the transference was going to invalidate their STR license?
I don't understand that question.
Okay, I mean, yeah,
Follow? They would have known that?
yes, because that's a change in the ownership of the property.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think,
So if certain people then raise their hand and say, I wasn't aware that was going to happen, and that wasn't my intent, can they back into their individual ownership? In other words, terminate the LLC?
I don't think so, no. I mean, that was,
Not under the.
that's
current
not even
ordinance.
really what this policy is addressing, but what this policy is addressing is people who are attempting to basically circumvent the cap by having a property that's held by an LLC or a trust, and then transferring that LLC without a change in the deed of the property.
I understand. But
But we've always had the position that a change in the deed of the property, is what you're describing would trigger a transfer. Is a transfer.
Right, and I'm of the belief that a number of people, in the absence of very clear guidelines on that basis, even after the vote, may have taken their property, which they owned in their name, and put it into an LLC.
Well, before the vote, there was a lot of questions floating around about that, and everybody said, can't do it after the vote.
That's what I remember.
So they
There was
went,
there was a lot of discussion.
That was a frequent question before the vote, and the message we put out is you had to do it before the vote.
so now that they've done it, they can't,
It sounds as if now that they've done it, they're going to find out that they will lose their SDR.
Then you keep it in
No,
LLC.
no, sir, no, that's not at all what it says. So what it's saying is if you successfully put your property into an LLC prior to the vote,
Not prior, after. What I'm saying is after. So if afterwards they put it into an LLC, and it.
And that was the question that was asked many
Yeah,
times,
yeah,
and
that-
many times it said you can't do it afterwards because it transfers the property.
yeah.
Even if you're the main person in the LLC or the only person in the LLC, because there are reasons you put things in LLCs that protects you, individually. So it's your property, you just want to do that to protect yourself, you could be the
So
only person.
whether or not the transfer of a property from a single person to a single person owned LLC qualifies for a license isn't addressed by this policy. That's another gray area that city council needs to address.
Well, it's not really great because if you're just going through
Well,
this process, transferring a property from an individual's name to an LLC, I have to transfer that property's name on the title too. So that tells me I'm transferring the property, I don't own it anymore, the LLC does. I might be the principal of the LLC, but the LLC owns the property.
And
When I change the name on the title.
If I could, yeah, I mean, we have viewed from the start here, any change in the deed is a transfer of the property. Okay, so this is just, there's been no change in a deed, this policy. But we're also going to view this as a transfer. But to go back to your thing, again, I think we've been very consistent, as they've said. Anytime the name on the deed changes, or someone is added, which requires a new deed, or someone is subtracted, which requires a new deed, that's literally a change in the ownership of the property.
Right, so LLC aside, if Mr. Smith, who was married to Mrs. Smith, held the property in Mr. Smith's name only, but after the vote, thought it best to add his wife to the deed, does that invalidate their STR? Not an LLC.
You're gonna change the deed to what Joe just said.
And, again, council,
And that question is not what this policy is about.
And that's why you have an appeal to a judge, and you can go before a judge and appeal it.
I don't know, it just seems like there is a lot of gray area, not just that, but a lot of things that now it seems like this didn't start with a clear, objective set of rules or playing field. It's like we're making up, the rules are being made up as the game
Well,
goes.
Mr. Ellis, let me put it to you this way. You had an ordinance that was very clear and very precise. You voted it down real quick. You got what you asked for. You got a referendum.
I didn't ask for a
The
referendum.
referendum come back with what we got to work with now. And now you're trying to work through all the gray
I know,
areas.
but you're in the same position as I am.
Well,
So
I
don't
am
say
too.
it like it's my fault.
I didn't say it was your fault. I said the council got what it asked for, got a referendum.
It's not entirely true,
Well,
and we've talked about it before. It's not entirely true.
okay, well,
There was time to talk about it.
no,
and that
we
time
talked
to talk about
about
it
it, we
was
talked
past.
about it for months.
It's not
We
going
asked-
backwards.
we asked for a 30-day
Well, let's-
pause. but you didn't
Let's
allow
not
it.
go backwards
Not going
anymore.
backwards.
Let's
This
not.
is- this
You
is
got
what
it.
we're
I agree.
doing today.
You got what you got. So now we're trying to work with what
And
we got.
that's why I've never said anything, but I continue to have you throw it back up to council about not willing to be able to talk about it, and I'm not going to sit here
I
and not
didn't say
respond.
I didn't say you wasn't willing
You
to
said
talk.
council got what they asked for. That's exactly what you said.
Well, you knew what was coming down the line.
That's
if you
exactly
didn't-
what you
You knew
said.
what was coming down the line if you didn't pass the
They asked for
ordinance.
a 30-day continuance, and you wouldn't allow it. Don't say we weren't willing to talk about it.
I didn't say I wouldn't allow it. You could have voted it in, but you didn't.
That's what I'm talking about. Quit going there. You know what you're doing. We all know what you're doing. Stop doing that. We're all in the same boat.
Let's move forward.
I'm moving forward.
So,
Mr. Ellis just wondered why he gets so many gray areas. That's why there's so many gray areas, because
Well, it's just
you
like,
got it.
it's not objective.
This is our time
No,
to fix these gray areas, but I'm opposed to this change. I'm opposed to this change because it seems to me we're telling people, if you had an LLC and you sold your LLC after the vote, when everybody knew, but you did it before this, that we're going to allow that. But is that not right? That is right.
if you did your LLC before the vote.
If you had an LLC beforehand and then you sold your property after the vote, but you sold it as an LLC, where I had an LLC with a short-term rental license and I sell it to you after the vote, but before today, you got my short-term rental license because you bought the LLC. That's what this policy says.
right, our current policy.
Does not allow.
Up until now, has allowed the sale of an LLC.
Okay.
And this would change it to not allow the sale of an LLC. So you were correct. Those folks who had an LLC on the day of the vote, between the day of the vote and today, when the policy changes, were able to sell the LLC and then new owners have the
And
license.
I thought, after repeated questions regarding LLCs, that the answer was LLCs were not transferable and would not carry the SDR after the vote. It was like any other change.
And that's what this gets to. It makes
It
it like
changes
any
it
other
now,
change.
but it allows from February 7th to now, if you had an LLC and you sold it, it allows that SDR to be transferred.
Because of the gray area that this is trying to take care of.
And I think we should hold to that it doesn't until we can fix it for other people. It's unfair. In Mr. Barker's scenario, it's you own it with your wife, and then after the vote, you go and put it in an LLC. We're saying, that's a change. You can't do it. We're not allowing that. It's innately unfair to that person to not allow them to do it and tell the LLC, well, because you sold the LLC lock, stock, and barrel, you do get the SDR. I just think it's unfair.
This
Well,
is closing that loophole.
And you gotta pick a point in time where you say, from this day forward, this is what's gonna happen. So sooner or later, you gotta drive a stake in the ground and say, this is what's gonna happen. Or you don't do anything.
I get that. But what I'm saying is, it was not my understanding that was our policy. Who said that was our policy to allow the sale of an LLC to carry the SDR?
That policy.
We asked that. Is that other?
We reviewed it in our March technical amendments meeting. We reviewed a list of policies and that was one of them. I'll be happy to show you that's a meeting with you. But we have been doing it since right after the first city council meeting after the referendum, when we had an executive session with council and we reviewed our administrative interpretations of the gray areas. And we are here today because of the conflict that you bring up to close that loophole for LLCs. If the answer is to give the loophole to everybody, that's council's will. But in the meantime, as Mr. Farley pointed out, currently LLCs are the only people who are being able to get out of the cap by transferring the ownership of the LLC. This would put everyone on the no transfer until council came back and fixed it for everybody. So the choice in Mr. Farley's terms would be to continue to tell the husband and wife no, that's a transfer.
To maintain it sounds like the rule change in the middle of the race, in the middle of the game. I may be wrong, I mean.
I'm sorry, like, so Attorney Wilson, were you going to?
No, I just, there is another exemption, of course, I'm sure you've noticed it, that you reduce the number of owners for any LLC or a trust, that would be more likely to happen in a trust. Say if a beneficiary passes, then that is not considered a change.
How about straight marital ownership? Mr. and Mrs. Smith get divorced. Mrs. Smith comes off deed. Is that a change?
That is an exempt because you're only taking person away.
So we'll honor the divorce, but we wouldn't accept a marriage. Mr. Smith marries. He wants to add his or her wife.
You're adding some.
You're adding your wife.
So we.
You're adding your wife. I mean, hold on
Allow
now,
for
come on.
divorce, but not marriage.
But respectfully, that question isn't part of this policy. This is whether or not you want to continue the loophole for LLCs until we come back and address all of the things.
What's your timeline for addressing the rest of it? I
We
think
hope
would
to
be proper.
we hope to have a
Please,
workshop with city council as soon as possible after the next city council election to address
I
all
wouldn't
these
even wait
things.
that long. I would start on it, if we could start on it before
Well,
and just keep rolling
with
because
the
that's
possibility of
important. If you want to shut it down and make it, this is gonna make it fair for everybody, as in like nobody can do anything. And then we have to come back and fix these gray areas. I mean, there seems like there's a lot of these little loopholes where honoring divorce and not marriage that needs to be fixed. So the only way that I think it sounds like this is gonna get approval is if there's another one ready to go right after where we can start working on it. That's what it sounds like to me.
It's kind of like another moratorium. What about when people pass away and then they want to take that their assets go to a trust for the beneficiaries, and they want to put it into a trust after they.
As of today, if it happens after the vote and the deed of the property changes, it's viewed as a transfer. The only folks who get out of that today are LLCs that owns the property prior to the vote who sell to LLC. So this change in policy would be to close that loophole. And that's all this addresses. It's not meant to address the many other various questions of ownership or transfer of ownership. That's kind of beyond the scope of a 45-minute work session with no introduction. This is just a policy to close the transfer of LLC loophole. To be voted. I mean, if we don't want to do that, we don't have to do that. But whatever happens with this policy does not change the rest of the questions that have been raised.
Right. We're not voting on this tonight.
Right.
We're not voting on this at all. You're telling us this is what y'all are doing.
This is their new official.
So we really don't have a dog in this fight until we want it brought up, we want it brought up next month then, as far as all these gray areas. Because if we're gonna shut it down, be more restrictive, then we need to start figuring the other stuff out immediately.
Just, I'm fine with closing the barn door after horses got it. One, I'd like to know how many horses got out, whose horses got out. We don't know that. I've asked for that list and Mr. Pope's gonna get it for me. I guess it's the right thing to do to close it now, but I worry about, I mean, we're telling people it affects the status, the loss of their wait list status. And even though we talk about wait list and doing it as quickly as practicable, I don't know that we've moved anything on the wait list or developing the wait list.
You haven't done anything since the executive session, except the one couple of things that came up and got voted down.
So it's interesting that we talk about, in addition, this change in ownership will result in in loss of a waiting list status. We've not really even come up with that. I also wonder if, and this I guess is a Joe question. I'm not an attorney, but I'm wondering, can LLCs contain language such as all heirs and assigns, like in the future, to cover, like if I had it in a trust and I leave it to my son and I leave it to all heirs and assigns, that would cover generation after generation after generation without showing such a change?
If that's, I don't think that's how trusts work.
No. And
They
the way-
usually, can I answer the question?
I'm just gonna ask
They
you.
usually only last one generation, right? So, but, I mean, if that was something that was in a trust, I really don't think a trust legally can pass it down for infinite generations, right?
So if my son, again, my scenario, if I left it to my son through the trust, and then my son wanted to set up a trust to leave it to his children, that would trigger the change in ownership as a new trust?
If the deed is changed,
But,
if the name on the deed is changed.
but even right now, you wouldn't be covered. You couldn't do that. You couldn't pass it down to him.
One time. If it was in a trust, because then the ownership wouldn't change.
But this will confirm that if it is currently in a trust, someone passes away or withdraws from the trust or whatever, we're gonna not treat that as a transfer.
Until they try to establish a new trust, at which time you add somebody on, it's a change in the deed, and then it would trigger the renewal.
It's a new owner of the property, yes.
I guess my question was really, can you just make it so vague, like with all heirs and assigns, that you just willy-nilly change heirs and assigns and say, well, Tim's one of my assigns, I'm gonna leave it to him, and then he's part of that trust and he ends up getting it.
Well, there is actually language in there that indirect transfers of ownership, such as multiple level LLCs, is the same as a transfer. So I guess you could apply that rule to, I've just never heard of a trust structured that way, to be honest with you. But it's kind of the same.
I don't know, we've been pretty good as a community of finding loopholes to things, and, you know, if we're trying to clarify gray areas, I think we should take our best legal swipe at closing the loopholes altogether.
Well, as Aaron has mentioned, we've had a meeting on that. We've tried to identify the gray areas that staff has been confronted with, and those have been presented several months.
Yeah, because I'm sure after hand and application, we become aware of stuff that we wouldn't necessarily know until.
Okay, so we were not gonna have a workshop for this after the election with the chance of 50% of the council changing. Why start now? That's why we didn't do it ahead of time. If y'all wanna have a workshop, September the 20th looks really nice to me.
If we agree to the change now, it's a placeholder and it keeps it from happening.
Yes.
And then we can still workshop it later,
Yeah,
even
yeah, whenever we go back through the whole process.
closes the barn door now.
For now, it drives a stake in the ground right now about that.
I'm-
Yeah.
Council can always overrule a policy. It's an
Okay.
ordinance.
All right,
I'll just put it on. I don't even want to ask everybody else.
I don't hear anybody else talking.
I'll tell you, I would rather move forward and let the possible new council members and the whole community know what's going on and let everybody talk about it, make a stance instead of the last election where it was just kind of, nobody even, when I went around asking people what were your issues, the regular one that comes up every election, litter, noise, since 2002 when you and I first ran, litter,
It's been coming up
noise.
since Dan said 61. I mean,
Dogs.
But nobody, I really didn't get a whole lot of short-term rental. And then the one candidate that did talk about it, he didn't win. So, and then for many meetings, you were here, we were all here. I'd say the majority of the people that were here were not part of it. It seemed like there was a second wave of the community came out. And so let's get it out in the open
Y'all
now.
want to have a workshop
Put
September
their
20th?
cards on the table.
You want to have a workshop September 20th?
Sure. I'll
3
do
o'clock?
that.
September
So
20th.
they know what's going on, and then
I'd
they
rather-
can say, I support it or I
rather-
don't support it.
I'd rather have the workshop on the 20th, but put the stake in the ground now so that we don't have a bunch of LLCs come up for sale in the next 2 weeks.
Works for me, but I agree. So you're talking about anything else going forward?
And for that matter, if we're gonna wait till September 20th and we put the stake in the ground now, we can wait till November when everybody else is on board. At least we,
We missed the rest of it.
it'd be December.
doesn't matter, we still have stopped everything.
For everything you tinker with, there's gonna be something else.
If we don't, we'll be flooded with LLCs that change hands and STRs past LLC to LLC.
Yeah, I think this policy just needs to be a consensus that, hey, we're gonna take the policy, we're gonna drive it in the ground today, and we're gonna move forward. Y'all wanna have a workshop starting this 20th of September? Hey,
What day is that?
that's a Wednesday,
Wednesday.
3 o'clock.
I'm fine with just putting the nail in and waiting. I don't, we're gonna put
Okay.
the nail in, what's the difference between 2 weeks? I mean, to be honest with you, but I mean, I wish we didn't have an election, we had to wait 3 months to do it. But I think 2 weeks is just too sudden.
Well, if you wanna do it before October, you know, October, the meeting is like another week away from that. So, the way the
We've
calendar
already, we've
falls.
already got stuff on there for October, don't we?
Yeah,
So I mean, that's, you know,
okay.
So what, we're having a workshop for what, on
No.
Wednesday? We're
No,
not? All right.
So what, just for clarity, what I'm hearing is no workshop on September 20th.
Right,
We put the stake in the ground, whatever exactly that means right now, for the policy, okay? And then we wait to work more on this after the election. Is that
yeah,
clear?
And just to define the stake in the ground, from today forward, if your property was owned and licensed by an LLC prior to the vote, and that LLC is sold or adds new members, you will count that as a transfer of the property.
Well, I mean, don't you think that putting the stake in the ground constitute a vote, a roll call? I mean, you guys are just abracadabra, this is gonna
we don't
happen.
vote at a workshop.
But I'm saying, put it on the agenda and let's vote on it. You're just gonna do this without a
The
vote?
policy don't have to be voted on. The policy is a policy.
If you'd like to change that policy, you can present an ordinance at the next meeting.
Okay,
why don't we add it in October, because it kind of goes a little bit with what we were talking about earlier, at least maybe get a little more direction if we put it on the October workshop. That was the only thing, was what we were talking about earlier. You know what I mean?
what you mean, put it on?
For the workshop of the October work session. The October meeting, work session. What we were talking about earlier, it's kind of goes together. We can just at least get a little more direction.
You mean
and
add
finish
this
it up in November.
proposed ordinance?
I mean, yeah, we're not voting on it at that meeting. It's just a straight
No.
workshop, so it wouldn't. it's
Yeah,
not
we
hurt
can do
anything.
that, but from
At
the
least that
day,
gets it going a little faster. Then we don't have to have one in September. Just wait till then. At least get the ball rolling.
but from the day forward, the policy's the policy.
Yeah,
Okay, everybody understands
I
that.
mean, that's, but that's only a month, and then we can
Other
start
people out
working.
there that don't understand.
Does everybody sitting here understand that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to resolution 44-23. And that would be Stacy. Now, this resolution, we talked about last time at the last meeting. This is a result of the old software we had not being supported anymore, so we have to get a new software. This is nothing new. We've been doing this same kind of software since 2018. And because of the procurement process is why we went through the whole process of bringing it to city council. It's already in the budget. We're just executing a new contract. Everybody got that? Okay.
Exactly what I'm asking for, just the ability to sign a new contract to replace the old system that is no longer functional. Does anyone have any questions about,
So the one-year contract with the ability to renew for 4 successive one-year terms,
yes,
do we know the pricing for each of those 4-year term, for each of those 4 successive terms?
no, so we've got the base price for this year, it really just depends on if we add any functions next year. There are other options that we could add, such as a 24-hour hotline that would alleviate some of the calls possibly from dispatch, so it's just, we would have to work that into the budget. For the most part, this contract for this year, if we don't add anything, should continue.
So is there any way to place a cap contractually on the increase if we buy the same set of services? I just want to make sure there's not a sort of bait and switch. We're committed for $35,000 in year one. It sounds like a wonderful service at that price. Now they want $135,000 for year 2.
I can only speak to the contract in the past. It only increased, I guess, as with inflation like everything does. I do know just from what I've seen from City of Charleston and from Mount Pleasant, we're in the middle. City of Charleston pays a little more, Mount Pleasant pays a little less, and it's based on the number of short-term rental properties that they're monitoring. So if our short-term rental numbers drop, the price could drop.
So long as you feel our exposure is limited.
This may be a Gessner question, but we already have this in the budget, correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Yeah, this
So
is just changing the contract.
We're just replacing the old software with the new.
so when we as a council went through the budget, we all approved this in essence. Now we are moving forward to do that and the rest of the process. Is that,
Well, basically, you approved the software we had a contract on. But
Yes.
because that contract's no longer supported, we have to get a new contract, but it's already in the budget. The money's budgeted
Yeah.
for the contract.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a one-year commitment. We're not nailing ourselves down to 4 years of commitment with no price attached.
No.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Mr. Pope, you got a minute? Lawn rehabilitation.
The shortest version is, as part of our ongoing growing rehabilitation phases, we designed a large phase with multiple groins that turned out to be very expensive and impossible to do in time with renourishment. So we've worked with CCPRC to separate the terminal groin from our larger project, and they're going to pay for the design and permitting of the repair of that groin down at the far end by the lighthouse. Since the original work was done for us as part of our larger project, we're kind of the umbrella agency for it. They're gonna reimburse us for it, but we're pulling out that specific groin to get it done, get the design work done, and they're gonna pay us back for it.
Kyle, you want to say anything about the elevator? Quick.
Equipment, including, all the pumps, hoses, electrical, everything is brand new. Because of the age of the equipment, 27 years old now. We can't get parts anymore. Big issue.
This was approved in the budget,
In the budget.
and the proposed price is about $4,000 less than was approved in the budget. Just letting you guys know it's about to happen. The elevator probably go out of service for an undetermined amount of time, at an undetermined amount of time, but we'll make sure to make whatever accommodations we need.
Okay. Don't go away, Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah.
One more thing about the water main project.
And I can hit that one. The short version of that is we've got about $4.4 million in outside funding for our redundant water main, which is completely separate from all the on-island work we're doing. We're now at the point where we kind of have to pay someone to start doing things. So in your packet, there's a contract for Weston and Sampson for about $609,000. And that's the same administrative contract that you guys approved for them and JMT for our other stormwater and water main projects. And that's basically paying Weston and Sampson to manage, coordinate, design, permit the redundant water main, which has now gone from about 3.5 million to about 7.5 million. We've got 4.4 million in the bank for it, and we are looking for the rest of the money, but we have several years to find it before dirt gets moved.
Okay. Now a motion to go to executive session.
So moved.